Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Agatha Walker, and I'm Marketing Manager at InVMA. I'm here to introduce you to our keynote speakers. We have John Hill, Chief Operating Officer from InVMA. John will introduce you to InVMA and this series of webinars. Our main speaker today is Paul Lockley from Device Authority. Paul is currently the VP of Sales EMEA at Device Authority, leading both partner, alliance, and customer engagement. He has over 25 years' experience delivering value-based customer solutions, building GTM strategy, and creating shared success. John and Paul will be happy to answer your questions after the webinar. So I would like to encourage you to type your questions into the question box in your control panel. It's over to you, John.
Hello and welcome to InVMA's Hidden Factory webinar series. My name is John Hill. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of InVMA. And before I introduce you to our guest speaker today, I'd like to just explain to you a little bit about InVMA and who we are, the background to the webinar series, and also what you can expect to get value from the series as you look through and probably look at the other webinars that we have on offer. So first of all, about InVMA. Our purpose is to connect the physical and digital worlds to transform industry. And we do this by using technology, solving problems, and driving change. What makes us unique is that we have a deep sector expertise and track record in the industrial market. We have an end-to-end industrial transformation capability from strategy consultancy through to control systems integration. We have an extensive ecosystem of partners. They include PTC with their ThingWorx and Vuforia Studio, Microsoft Azure, ARM for connectivity, Dell for gateways and hardware, and we also have our service partners of DMS and Sensei. The other thing that makes us unique is our flexible products and services. We have our Asset Minder product, which enables you to rapidly get to value in your digital transformation or smart factory implementation. And our services range from a simple discovery workshop to expose you to the new technologies that may impact your business, through to a strategy workshop with your senior leadership team to identify where the best bets are to place with the new digital technologies. A design and implementation workshop, which looks at how and what's the best ways of implementing in your specific situation, followed by our more traditional application development and system integration services. And of course, once you have done the implementation, our support package and service level agreements to help maintain the savings and investments that you've made. Why did we decide on raising and starting this webinar series? Well, bluntly, it's because digital transformation is happening now. Recent study by PwC showed that 90% of industrial companies are investing in digital factories. 70% of companies consider digital manufacturing at the top of their operations strategy agenda, according to McKinsey. And indeed, in the United States, the National Association of Manufacturers have made the statement that industrial companies need to capitalize on digital technologies to defend and advance their competitive advantage. Indeed, the World Economic Forum have found that those companies, the lighthouse implementations, as they call them, yield a huge impact. And they've reported double-digit KPI improvement in areas from factory output increase to productivity to OEE to product cost, time to market reduction. And indeed, the Standard & Poor's have noted that failure to act and make digital implementations over the next 10 years, half of the people in the Standard & Poor's 500 firms will be displaced. Most companies fail to move to this stage of scale and capture value at scale. And McKinsey in 2018 identified that in large factories, there were up to 8 digital transformation related pilots running in each one of those factories. But only 25% of those succeeded, 75% of those failed to go on to deliver any continuing value. And that's why we set up the webinar series. What we're trying to do is through our demonstrations of maybe the technology and our approaches, but more importantly, presentations from our partners and our customers who are going through this process or have delivered on these processes right now will prove valuable to our other potential customers and current customers. So, thank you very much for listening to this. And now I'm going to introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Hidden Factory series. Today's presentation is around IoT security considerations. My name is Paul Lockley. I'm VP of Sales and Business Development for EMEA at Device Authority. We specialize in identity and access management and trust for the IoT. So I guess what we're going to cover off today is answering the question, so why do we need to worry so much about security? And as we go through, the theme will cover the problem, the impact, some considerations, and I'll give you some example approaches of how Device Authority can help solve some of these challenges. So let's take a moment to look at what's happening in the Internet of Things. If we go back, quick rewind to sort of 2016 timeframes, we saw the emergence of some of these new issues in the connected everything. We had malicious code being downloaded. We had Mirai, which started to corral connected devices in DDoS format. We saw some of the big industry providers taken out for prolonged periods of time by botnet armies. Since then, that software, those malicious pieces of code have evolved somewhat through Perserai and Reaper. And, the challenge for organizations is your devices as well as your data are the new gold for malicious hackers and attackers, because they can corral these things together and effectively use them for their own ends. And there are clearly some challenges for you as an organization if your connected everything isn't available to be connected. So is it getting better or is it getting worse? Well, I just pulled a couple of stats from last year, which I thought were quite interesting. I mean, the first one is it's not getting better. They're not suddenly going away. Cyber attacks on IoT devices were up 300% across last year. So, we have to take a more proactive approach to securing these vital assets that give you business agility and business advantage. Some of the extraordinary stats I also found, 7.9 billion data records were exposed across last year. Phenomenal amount of personal data, critical data. And one isolated instance was 1.2 billion data records that was found online in an unsecured server. So you start to see that these challenges are growing on a grand scale. So we need to be collectively more aware and more committed to making a difference. So what do these security challenges look like for an industrial organization? They can be as broad as operator injury and fatality. If the machine that you've connected is suddenly taken over, suddenly taken offline, or suddenly does something it shouldn't do, is there a human involved that can be injured or, worst case, killed by that piece of rogue equipment? Is the information that is on that device flowing to or from that device critical or sensitive data? Is it critical to that operating of that device? Is it critical to the output from that device? Is it third-party data which you have a duty of care to look after? The challenges of OT versus IT. How do you convince organizations or parts of the organization that have air-gapped, closed network infrastructures to connect so that as a high-level organization, you can derive value from multiple factory deployments, multiple locations, and have your one pane of glass view. What's the impact to the organization for 1 day, 2 day, 3 days, maybe, of non-production? It becomes significant when you think about the cost for downtime. And then equally as importantly, as we look at that, what is the brand impact to you as an organization if it's becomes apparent that your infrastructure and your services are not secure? If you're providing a service to other people, it's significant. If you're building things that should be secure, you're losing market presence. And then when you compound that with the ever increasing level of legislation and compliance, it can be significant. GDPR on its own, for instance, is probably the biggest hammer that is being wielded currently and can be significant to organizations. So I thought I would pick some stats from a few of the industry analysts. So SANS did a report last year on the state of OT/ICS security, and I wasn't surprised to see that the number one thing that came out as a concern and a challenge is devices and things being connected to the network that cannot protect themselves or have had no security built in. We talk often about this secure by design, and it is imperative as we drive forward with this race to connect as much as possible that secure by design is the foundation stone of what people look at. And then I thought it was worth just covering off, where are the typical places that hackers are focusing their attention. So, it shouldn't be any surprise that this is where they're focusing efforts and attentions. And, we have to think about how we can create more robust, secure connections and infrastructures. And the best way to do that, the traditional approach is clearly failing. And then we've got people like Anissa who've tried to pull together best practice frameworks to look at where we can make clear, tangible differences with the least impact to what we're trying to achieve. Now, as you pick through those, take TMO2. All IoT devices should be using the appropriate methods for authorization and authentication, digital certificates and PKI. And we'll cover a bit more of that as we go through the presentation. But, look here for some clear guidelines and guidance on things that should be imperative to you as you're building out your connected factory. So where are the typical focus areas for attack within your organization? They fall into three main areas. The device attack, so that thing at the edge that's connecting, can people get access to that without you knowing? Can they get access to the credentials that are aligned to that? Are they static? Are they clear text? Do you have something residing on that device that is either your own IP or somebody else's? And do they have the capacity to download their own form of software? And how do you mitigate that? At the network layer, can they get access to the data that's in flight? So, for instance, depending on how you deployed MQTT, there could be a clear text handoff of data through a broker. And, there's multiple entry and exit points in that connected framework that give people the opportunity to try and maliciously or covertly impersonate devices or applications. And then at the server layer, once it's inside the enterprise hardwall, is the framework that you're using as an organization robust enough to keep that data safe? And are there ways to ensure that even if the malicious actor is your own employee, how can you secure that data to keep it safe? So what are some of the most common issues we see in IoT devices? I touched on earlier weak credentials. So static IDs, open clear text storage on devices, firmware upgrades. Is there a capacity and ability to upgrade the firmware on a device should there be a problem? Otherwise, you may have a brick device, which creates a whole secondary level of issues. Key storage and management. Is there the ability to securely keep those critical identities and keys on that device? TPM, that type of consideration. The lack of trust and identity at the edge. Have you got the capacity to continually rotate or update the strong identity on that connected device? Secure boot. So is there a way to ensure that it's a gold copy of the boot information on that device? And then data trust and privacy. So do you have a way to ensure that the data coming off of that device is secure, that it can't be read, copied, interfered with? And even at its destination point, can you enforce an encryption policy to that means that it's secure data, even if someone copies it to a USB or a hard drive or sends it off somewhere else, it becomes useless data. And I've added a couple more onto this list, which I think are quite critical. Does your approach and your framework allow for you to manage the onboarding, authentication, and identity for connected devices at IoT scale? Because when you look at a traditional organization, you will have many parts of the infrastructure secure, many applications to manage things, and there'll be for defined, managed numbers of people. IoT devices will scale rapidly. They'll go from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands. And when you look backwards, you'll have the, oh my God moment of how do we manage these? And how do you apply automation and efficiency to that in managing them going forward? So strong considerations before you start the journey rather than the shock at the end of the journey. And, just touching a little further on that challenge, in the enterprise, things aren't known. They are fairly stable, fairly managed growth. In IoT, we struggle with the fact that firstly, there's no implicit human identity to build from. These are headless devices. You need to build the trust and from there have a mechanism to manage both scale and policy. And you need to be able to do that in an automated manner, and it's not straightforward. So let's just take a quick look at the life cycle of devices and identity and where we have things in place today, but where there is really significant amount of room to improve. We hear a lot about zero touch provisioning, the ability to put a root key in a device to validate its supply chain. So, it gets built, it goes to the distributor who then sends it to the reseller, sends it to the consumer, and you have this ability for day zero provisioning. You know this device is secure, you get it out into the field, you can plug it in. But the challenge is that's day zero. How do you manage something from day one to day done? And how do you integrate that into your IoT platform of choice, whether it be Azure IoT, ThingWorx, AWS IoT, and the myriad of other platforms that are available? And how do you connect that device at the edge to those applications still enforcing, strong identity, how do you then, for instance, an easy step, how do you rotate the certificate on a device that was used for its supply chain authentication to give you peace of mind that that hasn't been copied anywhere on its journey? And so you have the ability to define and deliver that policy moving forward. How do you provision it, manage it, and integrate it? And then, of course, depending on what your service offering is, how do you decommission and recommission? If you're providing assets to temporary customers, temporary services, rental, etc., you need an ongoing process to update and change the identity that's bound to those devices. To give you an example of how this all plugs into the classic enterprise, at Device Authority, we've designed something called the Enterprise IoT Blueprint, which talks about how do you take the applications and services you have today, which are core to your enterprise, and use them in the most transparent manner for the services that you want to build and deploy today and tomorrow. How do you connect the edge to the core, and what considerations are there? So we talk about a number of steps, from secure production through secure onboarding to devices and services going live in the field. And you need something that joins the dots between the things that you have in place today and the assets that you need to connect to be agile in the future. And the Device Authority Keyscaler platform is a great way to connect things like HSMs and CAs with IoT platforms and cloud services, IoT platforms such as Azure IoT and ThingWorx, and give you a transparent service that enforces strong identity and authentication for connecting devices and encrypts data to and from those devices in a permanent manner, giving you that strong peace of mind. So you can consider anything from small to large and irrelevant of its task in this process. So let's have a quick look at some example use cases. So in the classic factory setting, in the old days, there was no easy way to get certificates onto the factory floor. OPC was a great step forward in that, which allowed certificates to be a way to authenticate and validate connecting devices. But again, there are issues with managing the life cycle of certificates and change within that environment. Device Authority have spent some time working with a number of industrial customers to pull together a solution that allows us to reside on the same gateway as an OPC UA server to help manage strong identity and certificate rotation for that connected factory environment. And we'd be happy to share more details on that if relevant. Example 2, smart machining as a service. If you are providing this service to customers, they will want to understand that there is a secure supply chain for their information, starting from the point where they or you import their data all the way through to, as we see on here, the data being sent to a CNC machine, that job being processed, the data flowing back from there, and how do you ensure that only the right machine can decrypt and use that data? And so this enforced encryption of data and strong identity from device and platform is a great way to ensure that customer IP is protected and only the right machinery is being used with the right files. And thirdly, let's look at that end-to-end data privacy. How can we enforce this strong data through some of these existing cloud infrastructures and IoT platforms that customers are using? We've done extensive work to make sure that we can integrate into things like Azure IoT, having transparent connectors for IoT Hub, amongst one of the parts of the Azure platform. You can see in here that we're able to encrypt and decrypt transparently to that infrastructure. And then lastly, a much more holistic view of where we can plug into the entire IoT stack, doing authentication, onboarding, registration, key management as part of an entire IoT enterprise deployment. So, in summary, for any organizations that are starting their IoT journey or looking and reviewing their IoT strategy, Device Authority is the only company that can provide trust and identity at the edge that is truly IAM for IoT and is able to manage multiple forms of authentication and control, so certificates and tokens, and deliver true data trust from creation to deletion. So what else is there to look out for? The problem isn't going away. I fully expect to see many more large-scale DDoS attacks as people, manufacturers continue to dodge the efforts to have secured by design and strong identity built in from source. Let's not lose sight of the fact that it's a rich market for these hackers. There's a lot of money to be made, so they're not just going to pack up shop and go away. And they can buy hack as a service on the dark web. So the continued focus on security, secure by design, and strong identity is paramount to every organization that is looking to connect everything. Some simple steps that you can take to help make this problem an easier one to manage. Firstly, I think acknowledging that there is a need for security is critical. And I think we're a long way along that journey. But the next key step, I think, is appoint an accountable person. Make someone focused and make them, make it part of their day-to-day, because then you get things done. Critical that you understand the legislation and how it impacts you and what your exposure to that may be. Adopt a methodology. Take a look at this, review it. Just because you did it in the first place and it seemed to fit at the time, it doesn't mean it doesn't need constant review. Make the changes that you need when you need them. Don't delay. And choose solutions that fit for you. They shouldn't ever come from just one organization, because it means that if you do have to create additions or mitigate issues, it becomes very difficult. You're beholden to that one provider, that one organization, to be able to meet your needs at your time, which rarely does happen. And build a culture. Secure by design should be the mantra that applies to every aspect of your IoT journey. So that's the webinar complete. The call to action from me would be to connect with NVMA to talk about your projects and any concerns that you have. There's a wealth of understanding and industry knowledge within their team. Please visit our website to see approaches, tips, some really great collateral available on there, videos, white papers, etc. And also, feel free to drop me an email if there's any questions or insight that you would need. And I thank you for your time today.